Hi, I'm Jason Debly, and tonight's review comes from a different region of Scotland that I don't think I've reviewed before on this channel. Normally when we think of distilleries and their location within Scotland's famous regions, we think of Speyside, Islay. You know, Speyside for the honey, Islay for the peat and the smoke, and then you've got the Highland malts, and then the Island malts. But we don't talk about, well, I mean, some people talk about, but it's not so common to hear a lot of chatter on whiskey channels and blogs about Lowland malts. And part of that reason might be that there aren't a lot of functioning single malt distilleries in the Lowland region. The Lowland region does have a lot of distilleries, but they're grain whiskey distilleries. Going back in time historically, Lowland malts were known to be unpeated, and part of that was because there was a coal industry there. So coal was used for malting the barley and heating it up instead of peat, because peat was not available. And because it wasn't peated, that affected the flavor profile, making it lighter. Also, the distilleries tended to be pretty big, like the columns used were enormous, which tends to lead towards a lighter bodied malt. Glenkinchie, for instance, is an enormous production. So Lowland malts had that reputation, being light, floral, sweet, kind of grassy, waxen, in a good way, I thought. But also, a lot of their content was used in blended scotch, and also there were a lot of grain whiskey distilleries there. It didn't tend to be in vogue for quite a long time because people or critics, they like the strong, powerful, vibrant flavor profiles. They like a lot of sherry. They like a lot of peat. So the Lowland malts were really a dark horse, kind of under the radar, but they had their fan base. I was fortunate. About 10 or 12 years ago, I was in New York City with a cousin, and he took me to some really exclusive high-end whiskey bar, and they had some Little Mill single malt that comes from the Lowland region. And Little Mill is a distillery that closed in the 1980s, never reopened, and never will. I don't even think it exists. The buildings might have been torn down. But anyway, the stock of Little Mill, the single malt production, was bought up, and intermittently over the years, bottles will be released. If you ever see a Little Mill bottle, pick it up. Light, delicate, a real harkens to what I think is what whiskey was 100 years ago. You know, in those days, they really wanted to make it light because the whiskeys often were brutally harsh and tough, and so a premium was placed on a light-bodied whiskey, my understanding. Today, the three big distilleries I can think of in the Lowland region are Auchentoshan, Bladnoch, I'm probably mispronouncing that, and Glenkinchie. And Glenkinchie is what we're going to review tonight. It's the 12-year-old. It used to be a 10-year-old, but the 12-year-old replaced it, I can't remember when, maybe 2007. The 10-year-old had a tendency to be sulfury at times, depending on wood management. Glenkinchie, now being a 12-year-old, that extra 2 years of maturation makes a lot of difference. And I haven't picked up on any sulfur problems with the 12-year-old. I reviewed this a long time ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, and I wasn't a huge fan. The finish was kind of bitter, and the flavor profile just kind of wasn't great. So I thought I'd revisit it, and I've been studying it, and so have a couple of my friends who are over. It's 43% alcohol by volume, which I like. That little, when you're dealing with a light-bodied whiskey, extra alcohol by volume, a couple of points extra can bring out some complexity and give it some panache. So here with Glenkinchie, you know, on the nose I'm getting sweet hay, buttercup, warm baked cake bread, I believe the wood management is exclusively ex-bourbon casks. The nose is not bad. It's reserved, it's careful, it's very Canadian. On the palate, sweet, honey, apricot, pear juice, cheesecake. Delicate oak, butterscotch, lime lifesavers. Remember those lifesavers you could buy? I don't know if they sell them anymore. And on the finish, there is a transition, becomes more dry, a little bit of pepper. It's kind of herbaceous, herbal. The finish is not super long. This is not a really strong whiskey. It is totally within the camp of a traditional Lowland whiskey. I think there is a new distillery that's launched or underway that's going to have peated malts, and that's fine. This has no peat. It does hearken to have some smoke, but I wouldn't call this a smoky whiskey. This is a light, honey, lemon zest, grassy, waxen, delicate whiskey. And because of the 43% alcohol by volume, you've got a bit of complexity. The finish, I've got some grapefruit pith in a good way. I like this. I'm really surprised because I had a very low opinion of Glenkinchie from my past experience. But I like this 12-year-old. Diageo, who own the brand, I think have changed it a little bit over the years. Just nothing major, but they've improved it. Because 10 years ago it wasn't drinking this well. And I had a couple of bottles 10 years ago. It was more pedestrian, boring, bitter, simple. This is not bitter, it's not simple, not pedestrian. It's got some complexity, butterscotch, honey, hay, wheat. If you're new to whiskey, this is a great gateway drug. I recommend it. I don't think you need water. And that's about all I got to say. Other than the 12-year-old, there's a distiller's edition where they finish it in Amontillado sherry casks. Really good. I like the distiller's edition a little more than this, but this is good. Then there's a 16-year-old available at the Visitor Centre if you go there in Scotland. And I think it's bottled at 50.6% orthopol, pretty good. And that's all I got to say. So Glenkinchie 12-year-old, if you're looking for something unpeated, not a ton of smoke, honey, lime, wheat, you get the idea. But very light-bodied, lighter than most Speysides. You're going to enjoy this. Thanks for tuning in.